Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 104, featuring Joe Mangrum, aka Sandman, an amazing visual artist who uses colorful sand and other mediums to make beautiful artwork. And he's been a longtime advocate of Web3. I met him first in Clubhouse, like I met many other of our amazing guests here. And like many of us, he continues to plug away in Web3 and in NFTs, building, creating, and putting his amazing artwork on chain. Welcome, Joe. How you doing? Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning, GM David. Thank you for having me.
GM, I'm glad you're able to make it. Thank you for joining. Welcome, everyone, to Web3 Warriors. I'm your host, David Karoma. I go by Chrome in the Metaverse. We're hanging out in our headquarters in the Voxels Metaverse, as always, if you want to join us in there. I see K-Bot hanging out in there already. I'm happy to come back live. It's been a minute since we've been able to actually have a live interview. And the advantage of having a live interview, of course, is that anybody catching us live has the opportunity to ask your questions in the chat. We always encourage participation in the chat. You can also join us in the metaverse if you want. We've got our podcast streaming on the Twitch screen on the top floor of the Web3 Warriors headquarters in Voxels, so you can check us out there while we're chatting. And today we're really going to be looking at the concept that we often talk about, which is art on the blockchain, but specifically, that phygital word that we like to talk about as well sometimes. But in this context, Joe creates really amazing art using sand, and it's actually temporary installations, right? So it's a little bit different than your typical kind of physical art pieces. And part of it is that it is kind of impermanent, right? And so when looking at the context of NFTs and the blockchain, we talk about immutability, we talk about permanence, and the idea that you're making something that cannot be taken away, and now you've got transparency and accountability and the ability to sell it on chain. But how does that balance with artwork that maybe isn't meant to be permanent, right? So we're going to have that conversation with Joe, and I really think it's just interesting to look at from kind of a both provenance perspective, but also kind of a time capsule perspective, right? Like, what is the balance there, and is it good to still be able to take a kind of record of the creation of these art pieces that are meant to be temporary, So I'm going to get into it with Joe. I'm so grateful to have you here. I actually met you for the first time a couple years back at NFT.NYC. You were making one of your impressive art installations there on the top floor in their VIP area there, and it was just really cool to be able to see it in action. Obviously, I had met you prior, virtually on Clubhouse, but to meet in person is always a little bit different, right? And so it was awesome to be able to connect with you out there. And with all that, I'm really going to turn things over to you, Joe. I really want to hear a bit about your artist background, what brought you to the blockchain. But first, maybe let's just hear a bit about, what made you an artist, and a little bit about your art career. And thank you again for joining us. So tell us about your art career.
I mean, if you want to go back to the beginning, it was Bob Ross in the 70s that got me hooked.
Let's go back to the beginning. We're Bob Ross fans around here. We're all about the art.
I was hooked on Bob Ross. I was about 8 years old, and my mom said, "Hey, you want to have some art lessons?" And so we went to a local artist studio, found somebody like painted in oils. So I started mixing and painting oils when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
And that continued all through high school, and when I was always like buried in art. So my art teacher said, "Hey, you want to try for this contest?" And the contest was to go to India for 3 weeks and bring back a sort of cultural exchange from India. It was sponsored by the Asia Society. So there was 5 students picked from all across the United States and their teachers, with a couple people from the Asia Society in New York. And we took off for 3 weeks and went all over India, went into little villages, talk about mind blown, sort of, 16-year-old from St. Louis, Missouri, Florissant, Missouri. The Ferguson-Florissant School District, if you want to put that on a map. I think everybody knows where Ferguson is.
Yeah.
But anyway, that gave me the travel bug. I went on to go to the Art Institute of Chicago, continued oil painting, and by the time I graduated, it was 15 years of painting under my belt. And I felt like I, grew up in St. Louis, hadn't really traveled a whole lot, and started waiting tables, and I was just like, this is not going to be my life. And it was just like at that post-college point, and I took off and I traveled around 47 states and about 13 countries over the next 4.5 years. And that gave me a taste of different cultures that, like India that I already experienced, but finding the like familiar icons and symbols within cultures all around the world. In Turkey, specifically, you got the Sancta Sophia, where you've got layers of like Christianity and Islam going over one another. In Ireland, you've got the Celtic knots that are intertwining. And I went to 47 states, so that included like Native American sites, the medicine wheel, 7,000 years old, learning about sand painting, and then having the art history background of knowing that Jackson Pollock was inspired by those sand paintings. And so it was like all this, along with like reading a lot of Joseph Campbell and Native American history and different things, all that during that time kind of gave me this formation. And then the kicker was I was on Lollapalooza 94, and I was doing hair wraps to travel around the world. I was like braiding hair and doing string wraps around people's hair. It was really popular at the time. It'd kind of gone mainstream from the Grateful Dead tour and stuff.
Interesting.
And so I followed the entire 94 Lollapalooza with the Beastie Boys and the Tibetan monks. And I was bugging the promoters and the production companies, like, let me do some ephemeral art, as part of the festival. And they were like, no, get away, kid. But
that's
end of that,
amazing.
I found myself in Laguna Beach, and had they were in the middle of a fight of environmental concern, building the San Joaquin Hills toll road through Laguna Canyon, which basically cut in half the last remaining green space in Orange County, California. And then, the orange groves have disappeared, and here they are putting a road right through the middle of the last sort of canyon there. And it's
America
really
sure loves their highways, hey?
Yeah,
Carving
and
up
it was
cities.
funded by RJ. It was one of the big tobacco companies and the Irvine Company, and big real estate money and stuff like that. And they wanted to just populate the whole thing with condos and whatever. But there was a fierce fight against it, and I wanted to bring the environmental concerns to light. And my way of doing that was gathering flowers and putting them out in these big sort of mandala-like organic patterns on the main beach. And so I would do that every day, and by the end of like 2 weeks of doing that, they were raking away, like the parks department was raking them away. And I was like, hey, can I get a permit, to leave, like, so I can work on this for longer than a day? And they literally just said, yeah, sure, no problem. But what it entailed was $1 million of liability insurance, and it was at a cost of like well over $1,000. And I believed I was within my First Amendment rights to do it in the first place, and it was very harmless, taking a flower from point A to point B and putting it in a pattern, And so I continued doing it, and they eventually sent out one of their beat cops by the name of Griswold. And ironically, the chief of police there at the time was named Neil Purcell. And he, I have a police report with his name on it saying, I sent my officer, blah, 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 to, so they wrote me a ticket for depositing refuse in the main beach park. But Neil Purcell was the same guy who busted Timothy Leary as a beat cop in like 1971 for 2 joints.
Wow.
So I thought, and it was like this pushback, but it was an amazing experience because you had all this psychedelic community, you had the Hare Krishnas, you had like Christians and Native American communities and people that would come out and talk to me during this time. And it blew up. It went into the LA Times, all that stuff. And I knew I was onto something because it was just like, all of a sudden, everybody was telling me their different opinions about it. And, they were reacting to the road and whatever. So it really became like this amazing experience that I was like much more greater experience than just environmentalism, but it was like speaking to cultures worldwide. And, people that didn't speak English came up to me, and they were, they bow to me or whatever, or communicate some way their appreciation for it, and try to communicate in different ways. So it was like this universal language that I
that's amazing, man. I'm hearing a lot. So you're getting a lot of worldly influences, right? So you got a bit of that historical perspective. I love that you've learned from like the indigenous perspectives, different corners of the world with layered kind of religious artwork and different archetypes. And I think you had mentioned hieroglyphics at some point as well. So really kind of like, I can see how that all kind of influences your work. One has to ask though, what brought you to the sand, right? What brought you to the use of sand as the medium and creating these kind of mandala-like geometric, really beautiful patterns that you have here?
Sand, you got to fast forward about 12 to 15 years. I didn't start using sand until 2006. And I'd been doing these, I'd moved to the Bay Area, and I've been doing these massive installations out of auto parts, computer parts, and other stuff. I should probably like just continue the Laguna story for a bit because it gives a real context.
Nice.
But so they gave me a ticket and I stopped and I went off to live in the Bay Area. And then I came back down and I got the permit. I got the liability insurance and I got a 2-week permit to do my artwork on the main beach.
Okay, congrats.
But in that time, a year had passed, and I basically went to junkyards, salvaged all kinds of materials, transmissions, different parts, industrialized parts and stuff. And then I made a city of auto parts that spread, 12 to 15 feet. That was all very intricate with broken glass and everything. And then people came back and like after the first week, then I started covering it with flowers and mandala shapes. And I'd hand each and every person a seed that came up. And I'd say, this is a seed, but I want you to do it is toss it in the center and make a wish. And it's like, and they're like, well, where's the center? It's like, the center's everywhere. It's like, what I've done is planted a seed. And if that seed grows, it's up to you, So it's like about challenging people to like really think about their surroundings and experience in life and like grow that consciousness around. And so, I went back to the Bay Area and continued making all these crazy things, cut up cars, made a mushroom cloud out of wheatgrass, with detritus all around. Like I kept collecting. I got like 6 tons of stuff. That's like car parts. I destroyed an entire car at one point, a Mazda 323.
Holy.
And so how I got to sand was I participated in the Florence Biennale in 2003 and did this pyramid of glass with gold bricks. And it was like the height of we had just invaded Iraq and everything. So the pyramid was like stacked with commodities, salt, timber, going up to drugs and alcohol, and oil and blood at the very top.
Sheesh.
It's cascading chess pieces down to the height of this glass pyramid, and it was titled Fragile, so fragile. And so it's about our economy and about how we exploit resources, and the highest commodities were oil and blood at the time. So, and then I juxtapose that with a mandala shape that was taken directly from the Florence Duomo, the rose window, and made it out of international foods. And then that won an award at the Florence Biennale. A gallerist from New York recognized my talent, invited me to do a solo show in the spring of 2006. So that brought me from San Francisco to New York, and I had to improvise materials just I had done in Florence. So I went around and I discovered colored sand at that time. And then so I included it in the installation. And then, eventually that was like, oh, I'm back to painting after 15 years and I'm using color. And then it was like, well, I can make, hieroglyphic language using lines and color the same way I can use these bulky, hard to transport, car parts, motherboards, microchips, all this stuff that I've been lugging around for years. But I had the support of the Burning Man community in San Francisco, so I could do these massive projects, right?
Nice.
And, so then I went back to San Francisco and I had a residency at the De Young Museum, and I did this massive brick and glass and, map of San Francisco called City of Gold. It filled the entire gallery of the sort of educational gallery, and used sand in that. And then I'd been married. And then at the end of the year, we moved to New York, and then challenging, new city, didn't know hardly anybody. the financial crisis hit, but before that, I had like met some curators and stuff. I did the art fairs, the Bridge Art Fair. Met a curator, invited me to go to China and do an installation.
Oh wow!
So like, went over, did this brand new museum, grand opening installation. International artists, including like Robert Rauschenberg, Kiki Smith, and others. But it was fascinating, and then just bring it and see that I did a physical object installation with like a caterpillar, like breaking out of like retail sort of constraints, called retail transformation.
Caterpillar like the machine, or an actual caterpillar like the insect?
It was a morphing of a caterpillar, a metamorphosis of like plastic flowers and materials and live plants. So it was like the faster, cheaper, make everything fake kind of thing. And it was like there's these stacked cubes of glass that you see as retail shelving, and it made a tower, and then there's a bamboo gold leafed pole that the caterpillar crawled down and then busted the glass. So it was about like nature taking life form, trying to break out of this sort of commodification boxes that we've come to do.
The planned obsolescence, right? Criticism.
So I ended up in New York, and then really just found it like difficult. And I was like, well, I got to pare down, and I used sand, and I one day I was working construction jobs and other stuff to get started, and then financial crisis happened. All the construction dried up. And I said, fuck it, I'm gonna go out to Union Square and just paint. And I started painting, and all of a sudden I was just collecting donations that were exceeding what I was making in a paycheck. And I was like, this is my jam, let's do it. And I just kept going for the next 10 years. I averaged one painting every other day. I'd work down to 35 degrees in the winter. You'd have to over 1,250, 1,300 paintings, something like that, over the next years.
And so was that kind of using acrylic as well, or is it just all pure
sand?
No,
just all pure sand, poured down.
And so how would you do it in the weaker weather? How would you do that in kind of like,
I would it was just a matter of like, most of the times the park setting would suppress the wind. You had enough trees around, and there wasn't a real big wind tunnel, so to speak, necessarily.
Okay.
And then I'd be right at the Arch in Washington Square, or at Broadway and 17th and Union Square, and I'd work, alternating those two spots mainly, and just put out a hat and collect donations. And sometimes the wind would pick up and blow things away, and it's like,
that's okay, right?
Luck, but I managed to complete 12 to 1,300 paintings, and going out there 4 or 5 days a week sometimes, and then your summers up to 95 degrees. I'm out there, nobody's around because it's so hot, and then you wait till 5 or 6 o'clock, people get off work and they start walking through the park to collect your money, and then a gust of wind like 25 miles per hour takes it away, and you're just like it's definitely frustrating at times. And and then there's the day-to-day thing of just people texting on their phones and walking straight over the top of it. And then people just aren't paying attention to a 20-foot colorful design on the ground, and just whatever. But
you gotta have a thick skin, a lot of patience. Maybe
New Yorkers that are watching me and engaged with it, and somebody'd walk through, and then the New Yorkers would be like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And just totally cursing them out in the process. So totally, just amazing experiences, meeting people from all over the world, many scholars from around the world that be associated with NYU conferences and stuff would often come to talk to me. We get into these engaged conversations just about philosophy and different things. There was one particular professor emeritus, Pierre, rest in peace. He was a regular. He was like a retired professor, and he would come out and smoke his pipe, and we'd get into these discussions because he studied the formation of snowflakes.
Oh, nice.
And oftentimes I would at Washington Square in particular, I would make 7-pointed radial symmetry. And so he's like, this is impossible in nature. And I was like, well, have you ever seen Spinal Tap? Well, we got to turn it up one louder. You know, we got to turn the vibrations up in order to, like, you know, engage and make the life that we dream about, you know. So it was like, it was always these fun back and forths of you know, the different regulars in the park and different people visiting from around the world, and just amazing experiences, conversations I had.
Sounds inspiring, honestly. And I love that you have that kind of philosophical approach to it, and you seem to be very open to that conversation and even welcoming of that conversation when it comes to like people really trying to get into like the reasoning behind the art and maybe even the history. And yeah, like, oh, well, that's not possible in nature. Well, this is art, you know, we're supposed to be expanding beyond maybe what's possible in nature.
Right.
We're showing a video on the screen here of one of your installations where people are kind of standing around and watching you make this beautiful creation. It's one of the NFTs you had on the OpenSea there. Can you speak a little bit to the impermanence that you just mentioned, like whether it's a gust of wind blowing it away or just the fact that, you know, eventually you're going to have to kind of wipe it away or clean it up, right? Are you very focused on making sure you capture it in some way before you kind of lose it, or is it very much kind of a...
Is it the one with the wind blowing away? Because I can't see it.
No, it's not the wind blowing away. It's beautiful. It's just people standing around, and it looks like you get it full to completion, and then it loops back around. Yeah.
Well, like, yeah, it was just like, it was constantly, you know, I just kept focused. I hardly ever took breaks unless I really, really needed to go to the bathroom or something. But I would, you know, 6 to 8 hours straight. And then I would hang out nearby to, you know, collect donations, sometimes up to like 12 hours a day, you know. And it was like, you know, during the process, people would sit, watch, and you know, ask questions. Sometimes like kids would come up and they'd put their nose, and I'd like nudge their nose away with my hand, or put sand on their shoes and play with them a little bit. And you know, literally after doing it for so long, I have kids in New York City that have, you know, started coming out to the park with their parents when they were like 1 or 2 years old, and now they're like in their, like, about to graduate high school. Wow. Or, you know, entering college, and it's like, wow, you know, the amazing, you know.
That sounds amazing. How much do you think like the ability to do that and have that kind of participation is more doable in a place like New York, or do you think that it really translates pretty much into any city or major kind of metropolitan area, or is New York a little bit more open and more kind of like encouraging of these kind of things?
Well, New York has a long history of allowing, well, a long fight for First Amendment rights. First off, there's an artist named Robert Letterman who's fought for artists' rights for, you know, 20, 25 years or even more. Back to the 80s, I think, so even longer. But you know, it's like establishing the First Amendment rights to free expression, and that also kind of hooked in with my history at school. There was an artist named Dred Scott at the Art Institute of Chicago who laid a flag on the floor back in like 1990 or something. What is the proper way to display a U.S. flag? And it caused a whole uproar, you know, 60,000 veterans walking down Michigan Avenue and this and that.
I recall hearing about that. Didn't that go all the way up to the Supreme Court?
Right. And it went, well, a flag burning thing, Texas versus Johnson, that he was also involved in, went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court then guaranteed that expressive acts are protected free speech. And George Bush Sr. was trying to pass a flag burning amendment at the time, if you remember.
Right.
All this stuff was going on. And so it's like, speaks to the power of art and change. And I spoke to the president of the school years later down in Miami, and he said the Chicago police had offered him a handgun, saying there are credible threats against your life. You know, it was, they closed down the school for a couple of days. There was bomb threats. There was all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And, you know, that just showed the power of art, you know.
That's amazing, and the power of art is what it's all about, you know. Wow, so you've got quite the resume, quite the history of profound artwork. Let's talk about you appearing on Sesame Street, among other spaces that you've been kind of highlighted in. You know, can you tell us a little bit about how Sesame Street came to be? I believe it was in the 90s. I'll let you give.
No.
It was more recent.
Like, yeah, it was probably 2011 or so first. you know, after I'd been sand painting in New York, and
Right.
you know, I'm out in the public space, so the producers came by and they were shooting um, a little segment for the end of their season, like I think probably season 41 or 42, something like that, and the they're like, "Oh, you're starting this sand painting. Do you mind if we take a time lapse of it?" And maybe, you know, I was like, "Sure, go for it." So that ended up in a little like 6-second clip. I did an octopus because they said, "Can you do anything with a number 8?"
Okay, there you go.
And I was like, "Okay, octopus." So I made this big abstract octopus, and then they included it. And you know, they were at the end of their shoot. They had already scripted all their season out, whatever. But they included that little thing in a segment called "Word on the Street" with Murray, and the puppeteer Joey Mazzarino was like really excited about it. Matt Vogel was part of it. He's like currently Kermit the Frog and Big Bird.
Okay.
And they went back and then they wrote me into the next season, and I did this 3-minute segment, you know, people in your neighborhood, and I was Joe the Sandman, and created Murray the monster with his sidekick Ovahita as the Mona Lisa. So if you look close, it's like the background of the Mona Lisa, and so it's like the Murray Lisa on Sesame Street, and Murray helps me, and I'm pouring sand and showing them all about it, and then it just sort of became this amazing experience, and nearly lost that one to the wind. Like literally, they spent the day at Chambers Street Park on the west side, Lower Manhattan, and they were shooting all their segments, and they had someone filming me work during the time. It took about 6 hours to complete the painting, and like right as everybody kind of gathered to, you know, say, okay, this is how we're going to lay out the shoot, blah, blah, blah. Big wind comes up, takes the top layer off of the painting, and everybody's like, what? You know, kind of like, what do you do? I was like, give me 10 minutes.
Meanwhile, it's like you're used to this kind of thing, right? You're just like, yeah, it happens.
And I'm just like, I can't blow this, man.
No doubt.
And so I like, give me 10 minutes, and I freshened the painting up. It just taken a like little layer, and kind of like, you know, if you take turpentine and throw it on your canvas, it kind of just washes it a little bit. And then like, and so we restored it, and then Murray and I had our gags, and he just improvised, and I couldn't help myself but just be laughing the whole time talking to a Muppet. But
that's awesome.
Such an incredible talent, and you know, pleasure to be interviewed by a Muppet, and then you know, experience like little kids on the subway over in Brooklyn 5, 6, 7 years later, and they're like talking to their mom, and they're like whispering and back and forth, and they're sitting across from you, and then mom gets up and was like, "Were you on Sesame Street?" It was like, you know, you're a star, man. I'm
solid New York moment right there. Yeah.
So great fun, and just a blast being on that show. And they ended up repeating the segment into several different episodes in years later. So I was in season 42 to like 45.
Let's go. That's why the kids recognizing you, you know, they repeated the segment. Oh, wow. That's so cool, man. That's such an awesome story. Maybe, I know we haven't gone into the specifics of how you like really onboarded into the NFT space, but I'm very curious about, you know, this Open Sesame drop that you have, where you've kind of told the story that you just shared with us, and you've got some cool artwork on chain available, and I believe you got some interesting utility in that, and you've dropped it on niftykit.com. Everyone can check out your Twitter at Joe Mangrum. That's Mangrum, Joe Mangrum. Follow him on Twitter. Check it out. Check out his drop on NiftyKit. Tell us a little bit about this NFT drop and the Sesame Street art that you're sharing there.
Well, it was finding a playful way to like use the dynamics of NFTs to like, you know, create something that people could have a collectible of this, you know, singular artwork. And but I then created 50 like AI generated characters from Sesame Street and the Muppet Show, and put them in context, and they're all staring into crystal balls covered in letters and numbers. And so the metadata is 20 lines of letters and numbers, and it's like a decoder ring basically. So you when the drop will reveal after it sells out, then you'll see all these riddles, and then anyone can race to like get the correct tokens to assemble into the answer. So if the first line of metadata is the letter C and the answer is cookie, then you need a C in metadata 1, an O in metadata 2, an O in letter 3, and so on. So you got 6 tokens combined. I hold these tokens, submit your answer as cookie, and then you win prizes.
All right.
So it's like, and then there's a burn to redeem. So you burn 5 of the 6 and the collection shrinks. And then there's other burn to redeem. So it's like those Sesame Street Murray Lisas are going to be valuable because the number of them will shrink and shrink and shrink.
Nice.
But also there's 50 one-of-one like AI generated characters that are all kind of done. And then everything's sort of based around the episodes that I appear in. So there's questions about those episodes. So you get to kind of revisit your childhood, be playful, have fun, and maybe get some of this stuff for your kids or whatever it is. And it was just my way of like playing with blockchain and what I've learned about it to like be creative and bring it on chain.
100%. That's really cool. Very exciting, and best of luck with this collection. It's very, very well thought out, and I think it captures a really important kind of moment in your career, but also just an interesting kind of moment from a perspective of the NFT space, because I don't think there's any other artist really with your kind of background that's kind of active in the space. Can you speak a little bit more to like what brought you into Web3 and NFTs? I know we both were hanging out in those early Clubhouse rooms, early 2021, but just specifically, what about kind of the technology and the promise really kind of hooked you in for an artist like yourself?
No, it was like everybody was locked down during COVID and everything. So I got an invite to Clubhouse in like March of 2021, I guess, right? And got really interested and really, kind of thought like, this is, what I do is the most ancient of art forms, is before cave painting even, people were drawing in mud with a stick, right? So so to take something as ancient and then use the cutting edge technology to then make it immutable on the blockchain and preserve it in a way just as a document of the experience. It's like the art is about the experience of being there, but what's left is the documentation, and to preserve that on chain I felt was both interesting philosophically, but also just a way that like my legacy is preserved and all the stuff that's gone away, and I actually have samples of every sand painting in sandwich bags that are dated and time stamped, basically, that at one point I'm going to bottle them all in little test tubes, and I have editions of 5 test tubes for each.
That's hardcore. So this is just the actual grains of sand, not
and
the
I was
not
talking
the
about
art.
this floral installations earlier in Laguna Beach,
Right,
with auto parts and stuff. I deconstructed that and bottled all the compost. So that concept goes all the way back 30 years, and I have like big giant jars, like it was like somebody dumped a bunch of wine bottles and Ernest and Julio Gallo gallon jugs out in Laguna Canyon, and I found him and I like dug him out of the like briar patches and stuff, and then I bottled the compost from that installation and still have that and many other installations bottled in some which way. Molasses and dried orange slices from Santa Ana.
That is a lot of random stuff you got ridiculous. There. And so you see ridiculous. A future where those things are valuable to the people that experience that with you, right? Essentially.
Well, it's like, it's the artifact of that particular day. It's something that's physical as an object, and something that's like, the I was there. It was like the ticket stub, whatever it is, that artifact that people carry with them as a memento of an experience. Like I have these bottled, and it's in a philosophy of like absurdity, of like I'm making a bottle of sand, have value beyond, its physical appearance or anything. And it's about, like, the banana taped to the wall. It's the
Right.
there was a famous French artist from the 60s, Pierre Manzino or something, that canned his own feces and
Jeez.
sold it
What the heck?
for like $30 at the
That's
time.
ridiculous.
And those cans are worth like $600,000.
Oh my goodness.
But it was like, it's like the conceptual art of the of the idea, and the experience being the value in it, and then the conversations that then stem from those ideas create new experiences.
Amazing.
So it's like really carrying this whole tradition of like vocal lore and exchange among people that are living and talking about things that are, had happened or have happened, and generating new ideas and concepts from them.
So it's really about kind of that time capsule piece, the provenance, and the I was there. I was there for this moment in time, right? I feel like that's really the value that you get with NFTs. But to your other point, in some cases, all art, ticket stubs, collectibles, it's the same kind of intrinsic value that is either in the eye of the beholder or it's not, and people can argue about whether it should or shouldn't be worth that much. But ultimately, if someone sees that value, then they're going to pay for it. And that's what NFTs have really just broken open the opportunities now, right? Because everyone can kind of participate in this peer-to-peer. If you see value in what I'm doing, you can pay me X for it, and nobody else has to matter. It's just me and you. If you support my art, let's go. So that's really exciting. I definitely.
Well, it reminds me of this time. Like years ago, I went to see the Dalai Lama speak at the Greek Theater in Berkeley.
Wow.
And he went on for a few hours talking about excessive consumerism and in the West and and the environmental, impact of it and so forth. And at the very end of his speech, he's like, and if you don't believe in what I say, just forget it.
yeah, that's okay.
Because we're going to exist, and, it is what it is. We're either going to take it one way or another, and it's up to the people.
That's probably my second favorite philosophy. It is what it is. And my first is to each their own, I mean, people are going to get stuck in their ways, and you don't have to spend too much of your energy. If you disagree with their ways, just let them go their way, and you do your thing.
Try to force you into their belief system. And it's
exactly. 100%. So you mentioned having these capsules of sand, which is really cool, or even other materials that you've broken down. But looking at the pieces that you made, like you said, 1,200, 1,300, were you tracking each of them? Were you getting like really nice photos of each of them? Do you have like an archive of the actual art in the finished state that you maybe plan to digitize or even monetize in some other way in the future, or is that more like in line with kind of maybe the Tibetan monks or those that do those kind of sand pieces where the whole point is for it to be impermanent and washed away? I'm just wondering, how much is that kind of permanence question important to you, and how have you kind of went about trying to keep records of all these amazing art pieces that you've created?
Yeah, I've documented all my artwork extensively. In the earlier days, I was shooting like film slides and everything, and it was the early 90s, so digital photography was not up to par at the time. And I would use Hasselblad, like medium format, large format, 4x5 cameras, stuff like that. At one point, I did this mushroom cloud made out of wheatgrass with this whole like post-apocalyptic landscape of detritus around it in San Francisco. And it was like 2005, but I got access to the Mammoth Polaroid camera. So we photographed with a wide angle lens on this Mammoth Polaroid. There's only 5 of these cameras in existence, and one of them was in the Bay Area. So we photographed that. So I have these 20 by 24 Polaroid images. And, I've used digital SLRs and all these different film cameras, and then more recently, probably starting around 2014, I started taking GoPro sort of time lapses. So there's extensive, and I recently got an Insta360 camera, so I've been doing that. Nice. And playing around with it, and just like well over 1 million photographs over the years. And I had the opportunity last year to scan all of my slide films, and so I've built 2 volumes of coffee table books. So they're coming out, and it's like over 200 pages of my installations from 94 to 2009, and then from sand painting 2006 to present day, documenting sampling of the different sand paintings and stuff, and just picking
Amazing. That's fascinating.
So
Definitely keep me posted.
Like,
let me know when that's out there.
This is why I haven't released a ton of NFTs, because it's like I've got like this longer term plan of like, when I release the books, then I can do the NFTs and then pair it with the sand and the physical and other things that like, and it's finding the right way to do it and having the bandwidth to really promote it in a proper sort of way to gain the attention. And then of course we had the bear market, so it all kind of collapsed, and it's like, why do it now? Right. Wait a little bit, bring on more people into the ecosystem, and roll it out properly.
That is amazing, and kudos to you for not rushing into anything and not thinking, I see a bag here, let's just like throw it all against the wall and hope that I can sell a whole bunch. You kind of paced yourself. You did put some out there initial, and maybe we can speak to that a little bit, because I know you mentioned how at the time that you put your kind of Genesis artwork out there, it was when the PFP craze was all the rage, and everyone was just like trying to get those going to the moon collections and not necessarily out for the art specifically. I do want to also acknowledge the amazing art piece you have over your shoulder virtually. It's a very beautiful piece there. So I guess you have been kind of keeping track of these art installations to the point you've got it on a virtual wall behind you. Do you have like a gallery space that you're doing in the metaverse at all? Have you looked into this digital frontier for your artwork?
I have not put it all together, because I've in the metaverse, so to speak. I just got this painting back from an exhibit in Madison, Wisconsin. I took about 18 canvas and works on panel, and I do sand on carved and shaped panels as well as canvas, and then some oils and acrylics that I've worked with.
Wow.
And had a big exhibit called Visions of Consciousness at it's Promega Life Sciences, but they had initially hired me last fall to do a conference table for their new nonprofit wing, which is called Usona Institute. And they wanted a sand painting to go under glass, so they had a furniture maker to make that. And then I gave them a permanent sand painting on wood to slip inside and under the glass. And that Usona Institute is for the study of psychedelics. It's a nonprofit institute, newly formed and funded, and by the parent company. So when the architect hired me for that, and then introduced me to the curator, and he's like, you should do the spring show. And so they have this whole like conference every year with shamans and different like people, professional scientists and everything, talking about psychedelics and stuff. And so every year they have this conference in May, and looking forward to exploring what type of research comes out of it, and the treatment of PTSD and other stuff. So
let's go. I'm here for it. I think that's the kind of innovation and disruption of the old pharmacare, pharmaceuticals industry. That's what we need. Some more natural healing opportunities, whether all kinds of different options and ways to help people through psychedelics, and specifically mushrooms, I think, are the real power. But there's a lot of different options out there.
They're studying mushrooms and toad venom and ayahuasca and
toad venom. All right.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with ayahuasca for sure. And so speak to that. Like, it seems like your art is definitely speaking to a very clear kind of multicultural, philosophical, worldly, maybe even psychedelic, endorsing type of culture. And people who are in that space are definitely finding you, right? And so I'm just curious, how has that journey really happened? Like, it seems like it's all just kind of through osmosis, but is it like, do you do a lot of, reaching out to those type of groups, or is it just that the art is kind of profound in that way that it just kind of resonates with them and they end up reaching out to you?
like my first works were in Laguna Beach, and if you know the psychedelic history, you know the Leary lived there
So you
and
got
stuff.
your roots.
I've been on Grateful Dead tour, so I've met a lot of these pioneers in the field and you know the old school people, and had just I've dabbled, of course, and just it was early inspiration, but it was also like the travel and finding and just being like being a young person in the world and seeing how it's all kind of messed up and this overconsumption of everything and destruction of environment. And it's like, since I was born, the world population's doubled.
Right.
It's like 3.5 billion back then. Now it's well over 7 billion.
Pollution exponentially increasing.
And over the span of a lifetime, you see like strip malls populate the farmland and all this stuff that you can only really see over time. And then like what's it all about, and like how people income disparity, and you see food deserts and all the other sort of problems within society get exponentially worse over time. And it's like, what can we do about it but change people's sort of philosophy about life and how we can like change our systems to better serve humanity and not grind people into the ground.
Let's go. And art can inspire us to be better, right? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, so it's been about touching doing one-on-one conversations for 30 years.
No doubt. So I'm watching this. We have in the background the New York Fashion Week kind of showing your amazing art on the catwalk, as it were. And these beautiful models are now stepping all over your beautiful artwork at the end of the thing. But I'm very curious, like how important is it for you to kind of be at these type of events, whether it's a New York Fashion Week, whether it's NFT.NYC, places where, your art is really a highlight, but almost in the background. Can you just explain, what it's like to kind of be part of that, and especially something like a New York Fashion Week? Like these are all, cover girl models just walking all over your art, so it's pretty amazing. Just curious, what's the story behind that, and how'd it go? Yeah.
Well, I met Prabal Gurung, who's the designer at Washington Square. It's just being out, being part of the fabric of New York City. Everybody like started. They'd show up and they'd go like, Sandman. And so that's how I got my, name, was like people of New York just started calling me that. But Prabal had a new collection, and he's like, can you come to my atelier and like, check out the garments that we're going to be presenting, and and then we'll pick out color. He basically gave me all artistic license to just be inspired by the pattern on his clothes.
I was gonna say it actually vibes like it looks like it's meant to like go with the clothing.
That was the one thing, is like vibe off of this, and then like literally it was down at Spring Studios in Tribeca, and I had 5.5 hours to do 3 sand paintings that were like about 10 feet in diameter, and my wife was like timekeeper, just sitting there like, okay, you've got 5 more minutes on this one, and just kind of keeping the clock ticking and running interference with anybody that was coming up to distract me. And it was like for 5.5 hours I just busted my ass and like laid it out.
And they gorgeous, honestly.
Made this mirror that like reflected it from the end. And the models walked the whole length of the runway around it.
Yeah,
and then
they walked around
it.
At
the end, they come out and walk over it. And it's like Whoopi Goldberg was there, Cardi B and Offset were smoking blunts up in the stands, and it was like Huma Abedin. It was like it was also right in the middle of the Me Too kind of thing. So it's about empowering women and all this kind of stuff, and just the whole message of it. I was like thrilled to be a part of, and listen to women as
yeah, 100%. Amazing. And you knocked that out of the park. And I love how even after everyone walks over it, they kind of pan over it being walked on now, and it was just like, emphasis on like it's over, you know.
Yeah,
we
and
are
then
now
the whole
complete,
crowd
you
just
know?
got up and like,
Yeah.
I did it once before for Fashion Week. A designer named Jen Cow. I don't know if she's really active in designing anymore, but it was like 2010. And there's a great experimental film that a friend of mine did, but it was just brown sand, and the garments were like had macrame patterns and stuff in it. So I did this improvised macrame sort of design with blue and steel blue and white and black over like a depth of sand, and we created a whole trough. And I had a whole crew to help because it was like 3 hours install.
Wow.
And I had to cover the entire length of the runway that they were walking on. So I would like, they had a trough that would lay down sand, so it'd be like a half or inch thick on the ground with brushes that would do it clean, and then assistants would then do a specific color on top of it to match the garment, and then I would come in right behind that and then draw these designs all over it that were inspired by the garments.
Wow.
And then also direct other assistants, like put highlights on this side, shadows on this side, and we pulled it off in 3 hours. First person through the door to like walk in and get seated, walked right into it.
Of course. And I mean, when it takes up the whole catwalk, it's gonna get walked on right away, isn't it?
Yeah. So they had a bridge over the middle of it, so people sat in between.
Okay.
So it was like pretty wild.
Yeah, what a fascinating medium of art that you've chosen, honestly. And it's really cool that you have all these life experiences in very, influential spaces, frankly, from Sesame Street to New York fashion. When it comes to the Web3 events, I'm curious, like I said, I met you for the first time IRL at nft.nyc, and I believe you've done your art installations at a few other Web3 events and that as well. How important is it for you to kind of show up at these Web3 events, and what do you kind of take away from them generally?
It's really, like it was good to do that thing at the Javits Center last year, I guess. And just like really introduce my work to the Web3 world in a way that like we're so immersed in the digital art forms and stuff like that, to show like a physical art form that's not painting on canvas, not, like something really different. And I think it's hard to get reach on social media if you don't have a huge account or you're not influencer or whatever.
Right.
It's like, and I'm not a person to like sit and chill my work or go up on stages and be like, blah, blah, blah about me, necessarily. I much prefer a conversation like we're having here,
right.
To just like, let ideas flow out of us and like you respond and, have a real conversation as opposed to like make it all about sales,
Yeah.
That's just the turn off.
It comes through in your work as well, honestly. It comes through in the work. It comes through in the type of, places where you show your work and the stories you have behind them, right? Like even whether it's Sesame Street producers finding you on the streets of New York, making amazing art and wanting you to get involved, and then it kind of flowers into an awesome kind of relationship and them reusing your content, or in the other side with the NFT or the NYC Fashion Week, right? And being able to meet someone again just on the streets of New York, and it speaks to the value of New York, frankly. And I mean, every time I visit, I get that same sense of like there's always something cool happening and people actually want to help you push things forward and see, ideas come to fruition. And, it's really, you can see why it's kind of the heart of the business sector of
I think we got a little sidetracked
America.
Earlier, though, because we were talking about could it be done in other cities? And I think, what makes New York so special about it is a walking city.
That's true.
People walk in New York City, and there's infrastructure of subways and everything, and people can get around really easily without a car.
Mm-hmm.
And the only other city I can think of that comes close is maybe Chicago with its subway system. I haven't been to LA for a while. I understand they're getting more, but it's like my experience in LA has always been a driving hellscape of getting stuck on the 101 for 3 hours straight.
Right. That's what I hear. I haven't been to LA yet myself, actually, but one day I'll visit our NFT fam out there. I do have some good friends from the community out there for sure. I'd love to get out there one day.
It's that engagement in a 101 city. And also like legally, I've been ticketed, harassed by police all over the place. San Francisco, Berkeley, you can just about go anywhere in the country and start doing. There's recently a chalk artist in Austin that got arrested. And it happens all over the country because it's like the police are there to enforce the law or their perception of what the law is, and the courts interpret it.
Right.
Now he's going to win because the courts will find in his favor based on the Supreme Court, but it doesn't keep you from getting ticketed, harassed, engaged by police, wanting you to get out of there, some other shop owner, somebody complaining about you. There's all that like, the Karens of the world or whatever.
Yeah.
I love Karens, but not those types of Karens. It's
less of that in New York. Then you're pretty free. You don't feel like there's anyone breathing down your neck.
With Robert Letterman, who's defended the artist rights, he's won a lot of rights for artists, and they generally, but there's always a new set of like park police or whatever. They rotate from one park to the other, and then they show up and they're like, "Well, you can't do that here." And it's like, and I've just gotten to the bold point of being like, go home, do your homework, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Nice. I like it. You know your rights.
Yeah. I was like, don't waste my time, buddy.
Yeah. I've been through this before. I've been at it for decades now. Please leave me alone. So I know when we talk about the phygital conversation, right, and the idea of taking your physical art that is very unique, very kind of time consuming, but then bringing it onto the blockchain. I'm looking at one here where it looks like you've made an animated kind of version of one of your sand pieces, right? I think it's Ether World. It's looking like it's called Ether World Transmission.
The sort of meditational video.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Oh, yeah. So
it's a vibe,
the OpenSea collection is all from one sand painting that I did in a local gallery in Kingston, New York during COVID, so it was like I just got invited to do this show, and it was like everybody was under COVID restrictions and wearing masks and everything and limited. But it was like, okay, so I decided that I would create the sand painting and then present it in 7 different ways. So there's a larger panorama, there's a glitch photograph, which is a digital like photograph of it, but done with in-camera glitch, not post manipulated, but in-camera photograph with a digital camera, and then just time lapses of the creation and destruction of the work. And then I took the videos and different elements that I had and then created this meditational sort of kaleidoscopic image and made like a 6-minute long video of it. And, so it's like taking all these different elements and saying, okay, here's a collection of this particular sand painting and different documents of it. And, that's the package,
Amazing. That's an amazing Genesis piece. And, considering you're sitting on a beautiful book of artwork, 2 books of artwork, and you're planning to digitize and have, more provenance on the blockchain in the future, I think in these Genesis collection pieces could be good collection pieces for someone to grab, very cool story you got there. And I love that you really, again, have really kind of taken your time on things. So I want to get back to that point you also mentioned when we kind of first were talking about this Genesis collection, where people were distracted when you dropped it, right? I think back to the early days of 2021, and the main narrative was artists can now go direct to seller, can cut out the galleries, cut out the middle people, and be able to sell their art to collectors who want to support them and have their on-chain royalty be guaranteed, into the future, right? So of course, there's been some changes in the way that those royalty systems set up, but ultimately that promise is still there, right? That artists can now bring their art on chain and sell, direct to consumer. But how do you feel that kind of narrative changed with the PFP collections, and whether it's Bored Ape Yacht Club, others that have, gone up and then way down in value, but they at the time in 2021 were basically really taking the lion's share of the attention, the lion's share of the liquidity and the investment money in the community. And we did hear a lot from different artists in the more traditional kind of art space that they weren't really happy with the whole PFP explosion. Can you speak to that a little bit, and maybe what it was like for you personally, having dropped your art with your amazing career and your history that you have, and just kind of what it was like going up against some of that PFP narrative?
Yeah, I think it had to do with like the existing ecosystem of crypto in general, in that it's largely a financial instrument for so many in the space, and some admittedly inexperienced art collectors. Some very good, some like I know a lot about art and they collect and do it individually, but it's also like like through all the noise and the algorithm and as an artist today, you nearly have to be like a master of content creation as well as a master of your craft. And I think that really challenges a lot of artists in a way that they're not prepared to make videos every day, and then it distracts you from uh you know doing the art, and which would you rather do? And I think most artists be like, I didn't get into it to create videos and content and, funny, things on the internet. I got into it because I love making this stuff.
Right, 100%.
And so, it's like breaking through that noise is very difficult unless you've got like some type of stage, with like whatever platform or, the sort of content creators platforms of spaces or clubhouse days, the people who gathered many influencer types, that would feature artists back in those days. But those types of features have gone away completely. And we talk about like meme coins and other stuff, and I think ETH is like got the security and the provenance and all the things that can be done with smart contracts. And there's been a shift to like Solana being the meme coin chain because of the fast transactions and cheap transactions, and then a lot of attention swayed from ETH to Sol, and then Bitcoin like wanting to be art. But I think that ordinals and things like that, the art that you see is not necessarily groundbreaking, but it's also sluggish to the chain. It slows everything down that's already slow.
Right.
And I made a comment once about, like art on ordinals is like not it's like it's just putting an expensive frame on something mediocre.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's
I
like,
mean,
I don't want to diss anybody, but it's just like, like we got to get our priorities intact, and it's just
mhm.
one of those things where it's like, there's we've got to bring art into the ecosystem and make it about artists and not necessarily about financial transactions and flipping and stuff.
Yeah, I hear you. So whether
Create
it's the
10,000,
PFPs or the meme coins or
right?
these ordinals now,
But if
it
it comes
does seem
about
to.
flipping and everything, it's like
Right.
the traditional art world. You don't flip something like overnight.
Right.
It's like you don't buy a Pollock or a Picasso and then sell it the next day.
No, no, that's not how it works.
Or
Usually many, many
Basquiat.
years. And most people, I mean, like when I think about selling art NFTs, which I've sold a few, and it's always kind of the same situation. If I'm going to list it at all, I'm going to list it at a price that I feel reflects the value that I see in it. And if I love the art, which I generally buy art that I love. So if I'm going to list it at all, I'm going to list it at a fairly high, amount that I think, if I'm going to lose it, I'll lose it for this amount kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, also thinking about the royalties and what goes back to the original creator, where again, putting it at a fairly higher dollar amount means that they're getting a bigger chunk back as well. And then it's also kind of weeding out the flippers, right? Because people are generally not going to spend like a fairly high valuation of money on a piece of art just to flip it. Usually they're looking for kind of the low, right? They're trying to buy low, sell high kind of thing. So usually it weeds out kind of just the flippers, and it's actually more likely that the person that's going to spend, a decent chunk of change to buy this art from me actually loves the art and actually wants to have it for some, foreseeable future, and not just looking to flip it right away. So that's my mentality.
Yeah.
I don't know how much, in the end you can never read people's mind, and I think there's different reasons people buy and sell. But as a collector of art on the blockchain, I definitely see the resell option as an important piece of what makes NFTs kind of versatile and really attractive to art collectors. How easy it is to sell it, but also to your point, you should be able to do that without cheapening the art, and I feel like that's kind of the balance act there, right?
The 10,000 collections, it's like, people added a lot of value to it because it was like something you could make money off of, and it's like, in reality, it's like these are brands with teams of artists, marketers, like creating, merchandise and all this other stuff. And they're big companies, that you're buying into. And there's nothing wrong with that. But to blur the line between that and, what a true curated collection of art is slippery slope in a little way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
When I look at ones like a Yuga Labs, for example, where very much it was kind of a brand and a team, and like they paid the artist whatever, fractional amount they paid the artist, and it was kind of a very corporate way of kind of running things. But then I look at maybe a Crypto Rastas or a Long Necky Ladies, or even frankly Afro Droids with the Owo is like a 2-person team, right? There's a weird kind of blurred line there, definitely, because it's all of them are selling their work to create investment, to create revenue for themselves, but they also have a plan around how these collections are going to be functioning into the future, right? So I think about the Long Necky Ladies, they kind of went into a whole, like, we're going to help kids kind of understand the technology in a very safe way, which I think is awesome, right? And Afro Droids, a lot of people criticize them that they just kind of fizzled out, but I see Owo plugging away, creating 3D artwork. He's creating amazing art spaces.
That collection. I hold about 6 or 7 droids and all the other airdrops and comic book stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, and they dropped the Voxels wearables, right? They had Voxels wearables they gave to their community, which was awesome. I can wear my Afro Droid and Voxels,
and gave back right off the bat.
Right, 100%. Yeah, exactly. With the school for girls.
That's a whole other sort of realm of possibility and things for artists to do. And I think it's important to differentiate that from a brand that Nike or whoever's coming in to like create NFTs as a, sort of extraction of monetary value. And if it's not looked upon as art or growing or building on top of individual artist's vision, it's,
what's the real worth there? What's the intrinsic value,
what's the why,
Yeah, exactly. What's the why? That's the important piece. So true. More than just getting the bag, there should be a bigger why there, a bigger community, a bigger goal, a bigger emphasis, maybe even just social impact. And like with the Afro Droids, as far as I'm concerned, being able to build that school was reason enough. They could have just said, like, we got mission accomplished, we're good. Enjoy the art, like that's it. But they still, Owo's building out, and we'll see what happens.
Give away all this, like 25% of your drop, to build a school. Fantastic. And then what it resulted in is a struggle to complete the movie and all the other things. But I was like, yeah, dude, you can do no more, and I'm happy. But I'd love to see this project come to fruition and stuff. And I know how hard it is as an individual artist to, like, I have my own big projects that I want to do. But it's like it involves a lot of technology and like documentation and teams and sponsorships and stuff like that. I'd love to be able to like create a whole like AR experience where I make the painting and you can plug an AR into your phone and view it in your living room of me creating the sand painting in front of you in your living room.
That's amazing. And you can do that. You can do that tomorrow. Technology. But like you said, it's just the development, right? It's not you're gonna just do it on your own. You gotta have a little bit of a team, or at least someone who agrees with your vision and will put in the work. Right? Yeah.
But it would be a fantastic way to preserve the process of what I do.
100%.
And so there's all kinds of wacky ideas I have, but it's like, do I have the money to fulfill it?
The value or the liquidity, the capital is always required. It's always part of the equation. But to your other point, it's not the be all and the end all. And I think what your story also shows is when you're out there creating and putting in your effort, sometimes things just fall into place and help you kind of move forward and continue to kind of gain your reputation and really just promote your artwork and get yourself out there a bit more. So thank you so much for this conversation, Joe. We're going to have a few more questions here as we wind down. Anybody who's joining us on the live feed, if you have any questions at all, now's your time to ask them before we wrap up. But very enlightening, eye-opening, inspiring kind of conversation so far, Joe, and I really appreciate your insights on everything. So I know you mentioned kind of being more active in the Ethereum space and seeing kind of from a technological perspective why the Ethereum NFTs work so well. How do you feel about other blockchains? I know you're mentioning kind of the ordinals, and then Solana being a little bit more of a meme coin chain these days. I do have a decent collection of Solana NFTs, and then there's Tezos as well, which seems to have no other function than to create Tezos NFTs. I'm not sure what Tezos is really for other than that, but I'm curious about like your thoughts around other blockchains. Do you have like an open-minded approach? Are you very much kind of leaning towards Ethereum and just sticking with Ethereum? Just curious.
I'm very open-minded. I'm excited about base and stuff. It's just, base and like Solana, I played around with it. Tezos, I've played around with it. I haven't minted on Tezos or anything, just collected. And, I'm open to it. I think Tezos is decent for art and it's like stuff that you can do, but it's also like splitting your attention between so many different chains, I think can be really distracting as well. We want the lower transaction fees and stuff, but when you're talking about like, piece of art that's worth thousands of dollars, it is a, $30 or $40 transaction fee, all that much to be concerned about. And for me, it's like Ethereum has that, like, can be high gas or whatever, but I think there's been a lot of steps to fix that, but it's also, the market base and everything, has been there for art, collecting art. I think it's more established in that sense. So I do like Ethereum a lot. I'm not against any other chain. I may drop something, but it's just simply getting the bandwidth to, do it. I collected the Rafik Anadol thing on Tezos.
Oh, nice.
From the MoMA, and you look at that collection online and none of them are for sale.
Wow.
This is a major artist, internationally known within the crypto and technological spaces, but the people who collected the art have no idea they can even sell it.
Yeah, or maybe they don't want to sell it. That's possible.
Or maybe they don't.
Yeah.
Maybe they're true collectors because they're going to a major Museum of Modern Art, and they collected this thing, and they're just like, this might be, maybe a 10-year hold or time horizon or whatever.
You never know.
You never know, but they're like, I haven't checked in a while, but there was hardly like maybe one or two out of like 5,000 for sale.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I'm gonna go check on it because I didn't get that at the MoMA. I actually saw the Rafik Anadol installation. I think it was in its first month because it wasn't this year, but it was last year when I went to NFT.NYC. I ended up making it to the MoMA and seeing it IRL. Wow, what an installation! And we actually were lucky enough to talk to Christian Burke, who's his lead data scientist. They're actually a two-person team, so he actually does all of the kind of back-end programming work that makes the Rafik Anadol AI pieces like function properly. But Rafik is kind of the artistic eye for it as well, right? So he was speaking to how they actually created that big AI wall that is like forever evolving, and wow, it's just fascinating. And I think MoMA decided to make that permanent, right? So maybe that's where they dropped the Tezos NFTs and that. I wish I got one of those. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was just a QR code on the wall, and you had to download an app and then re-download.
I missed that QR code, I think, or it wasn't there when I was there. I don't know, but
it was kind of hidden, and I think a lot of people skipped by it and whatever, didn't see it.
That's wild.
I managed to get one on my phone and one on my wife's.
Nice. That's awesome. I'm a fan of what he's doing with AI. And what are your thoughts around AI as well as a traditional artist? And what are your thoughts around that?
I like to see innovative things done with AI, and we're just in the fledgling stages of it. And I created AI with this Sesame Street project. There's 50 generated characters, but made from prompts about like with the crystal ball and blah blah blah. So it's like I think it's interesting. Do I think it's like got all kinds of potential? Absolutely. But it's just like any art. It's like you have to, a lot of artists come up to me, young artists, and they're like, well, how do you become a great artist? And it's like, well, you've got to, first of all, you got to know who you are. and you got to have a vision of what you want to say to the world. And then it's about a matter of finding the right techniques and medium that orchestrates, and then you build the technical skills to manipulate that medium as a master. And then when you've orchestrated the medium, the message, and the proper presentations of all that, then you're an artist. Wow. It's not like, oh, I copied a picture of Prince, great. You can draw whatever, but what does it say about you?
Right. So in the end, it's the medium. It's just another medium, but you got to treat it like an artist and not like just some transaction. Like I punch in, this prompt and I get this image, and therefore I am an artist. But it's like have a little bit more process and kind of thought behind, like you said earlier, the why, right? What is the why behind it?
What's the why?
Yeah, amazing. Appreciate that. So just curious, what's kind of next for Sandman? What do you got around the corner? What are you kind of most excited about? I know you got this drop on Nifty Kit, and everyone's going to go check out your Twitter and jump over to Nifty Kit and show some support.
Yeah, OpenSea thing. And this painting behind me is on Manifold as a claim physical, and it's also like I've triangulated the NFT with a digital certificate of authenticity that records all the different spaces it's been exhibited in, so it keeps the provenance alive where the collector can then add to it. And then, I've recorded it, like it was shown in Miami, it was recently shown in Madison, Wisconsin, and then it goes back into storage. So it's like a few eyeballs see it, and then it disappears.
That's amazing. And so with it on Manifold, how is the digital side working? So you're selling the NFT?
It'll be like a claim after the NFT is purchased, then a sort of burn to claim the physical.
Okay.
And that's the tricky thing I haven't completely figured out. There's a lot of platforms that have a digital sort of program, but you have to vault the object. Right. Mm-hmm. Different platforms have tried it. I think 4K, like Folded or something, or Americana, one of the two. There's these different ones, and it's like they're viable for merchandise and like putting down NFC tags and merchandise or whatever. And I can send the boxes full of hoodies to people can claim the physical or whatever. But when you're talking about an artwork like this, it takes it's like a needle in a haystack to find the proper collector that's going to steward the artwork and spend, appropriately for the time invested and my career as an artist and reputation that, it's a value that's higher in value. So it's like, who's going to spend $30,000 on a painting? It's, you got to locate that person, and it's not easy in today's world. And, I've always been a self-representing artist. So these paintings make appearances in public, and then people see it, and then if it doesn't sell, it doesn't sell. I sold one piece out of the last show, but and then some other promise of like, in the future, when my wife and I are settled and our twins are not 2 years old,
of course.
kind of thing.
We'll be back.
Timing for the collector, it's timing for the artist. It's like being able to reach an audience that's appropriate. And, so Materium has come the closest, but it's like these vaulted services like require that you vault the artwork with them. So as an artist, you can't really, then exhibit the artwork to sell it because it's a physical thing. Like that would work for a Pollock or a Basquiat or some high-end blue chip artist. But a working artist in today's world, you need to be able to take your work to a place for people to view it, because it's not digital. It's got texture, it's got scale, it's got something that can't be represented in another form other than the physical work itself.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think they need to vault it? Like I think about Maker's Place, right? We've had Marco Santini. He's another New York-based artist. He's been on the show a couple times, and I know when I met him actually was at one of the Miami shows. I think it was Scope on the Beach, and he was able to show. He was actually displaying it with Maker's Place, so they were, you know, showing the physical art piece, and it was another digital piece where he does his kind of he does these art books where he cuts them up and they look really cool. And then he had that physical piece there, but then there is also the digital NFT, and when you buy the token in the NFT, you get both the physical and the digital. But they allow them to kind of go to different art shows and show the art piece. Granted, it was with Maker's Place, so it wasn't just him as an individual.
Right.
So I'm just curious. This one you mentioned, Materium, is it?
Yeah.
I'm curious about why they would vault it and want to just like hide it away. Like, you'd think you have to actually be active, like you just mentioned, like at shows and kind of showing the work in front of art collectors.
I'm not sure how like it all works, but it's a vaulting, trustless sort of system. So there's like trusted third parties that vault the work or whatever. And like, I'm not so familiar how like Maker's Place works it out, but like it's one of those technical challenges. And like, honestly, like I haven't, like, since Maker's Place has kind of come into the scene doing like more and more physical works, I haven't had the, you know, bandwidth to like really do the research on it.
Oh, that's
so
cool. It might be one worth checking out.
I signed up for Maker's Place. Got in, you know, I'm in the middle of building a house and renovating this like old house, and it's taking a lot of my time, and then making the books and doing whatever shows I can.
Life happens.
Busy man, you know.
I hear you. I am curious when it comes to the actual sand paintings that are able to be put on the wall. What do you actually use for like adhesive, and how hard is it? Because it's like everything's getting stuck to it as you create it, so you kind of have to be perfect, or how does that work?
Well, it's I first stretch the canvas over plywood, and so it's a sturdy surface, and I actually crawl on top of the, like, that's a 6 by 7 foot canvas, and I'll, you know, reach in as much as I can, but sometimes you got to reach in and actually put your knee down on it, and so I protect my knee pads with like towels and whatever as not to mar the surface. But the first layer is just dry sand on raw canvas, and then I take a paint sprayer with a acrylic type finish and fog it like 3 feet above to dampen the sand. And then as it gets damp and it won't move so much, then I go and zero in and soak the whole thing through, so it binds the canvas with the sand and throughout. And then I've got this base design on the canvas. And then I'll like take specifically, like, you know, I created this technique. So it's like the squeeze bottles of acrylic with different gauge metal tubes, and I squeeze out different scale lines, wet, clear acrylic, and then I dust the sand over the top of it. And then it has to dry completely. And then you brush off any excess sand and then apply another layer.
So that's like is that 2 layers of sand then? So the initial one,
it's like the base coat is just one of like probably 50, 60 layers.
Holy smokes.
Like there's like every color is a different layer, and every little portion of it, it's like, it just gets stacked up, and there's actually thickness to it where, you know, maybe comes out a 1/4 inch, but it took 11 passes of acrylic and sand, because the acrylic shrinks when it dries to get the effect. And so it's like you're talking about a couple months of work into a painting that scale, you know.
That is awesome, man. And I can only imagine, like, up close, the texture must just be like amazing.
And that's all sort of a freehand design that's created on the raw canvas, like I do in the park. And then I also take previous pieces that I did on the park and then project the image onto a plywood, and then cut out the shape of the plywood, and it's got a perspective to it and kind of flies through the air or whatever. And then I carve with a plunge router different depths into the plywood to kind of enhance the perspective and make a relief sculptural type object, and then apply the sand over and over in the same way. So it's like there's a lot of dry time, and I generally work on a couple different pieces at a time, so that I can go back and forth in the studio to, like, you know, not just be wet watching paint dry, literally.
That's hardcore. And you're like being super productive and you're doubling up, you're multitasking. And
Yeah.
I mean, you often hear about like artists like kind of having a tunnel vision on one piece of art.
Yeah.
So the fact that you can even.
The thing is like I get lost in that process, and then I'm like, oh, I forgot to take my time lapse so I can put it on Instagram.
Of course, like, yeah. Don't worry about that stuff. That's secondary, you know.
Like, how do you like, you know, over a 2-month period, if you're working on a painting like this, to document it in that way is so much extra work to then piece together all this video and stuff. You know, it's like,
it's a lot
to be, you know, true to it. And it's like, so, you know,
you're an artist, not necessarily a content creator, and you shouldn't have to do both. I hear you, especially, you know, looking at Meta, I mean, now Twitter is whatever it is, but like I've always been highly critical of Meta and its kind of data usage, and you know, now Twitter has its reasons for criticism as well, but you know, I always think that should be secondary. And to your point, it almost makes it more special that it's not just ubiquitous and everywhere, right? It's like, you know, if you want to know about the artist and you want to know about this art and its story behind it, you have to actually take the time to either listen to the artist or read his website or do whatever, you know, that little bit of extra kind of engagement with the actual art. So that's amazing. And I have to ask, how much do these pieces go for? Obviously depends on the size and the amount, but what's kind of like the average for an awesome Sandman piece I can put up on my wall?
I've got pieces that go like, they range from like 3,500 up to like, this one is the most expensive. It's 30,000.
Wow. Nice.
And I just priced it in USD because I priced it in ETH before, and then the ETH fluctuated and made it like $45,000. And I was like,
of course, that wasn't what I meant.
Like anybody, you know, but I'm comfortable with that number for this point in my life, and you know, it's just a matter of, you know, showing it and finding the right person to steward the work and hold on to it as I build my career.
Yeah, it's amazing, really, really inspiring, and I wish you all the best with that career. And I think you're onward and upward. You know, it just sounds like you've got a lot of different opportunities. You've got a lot of respect from influential people and influential corners of New York and America more broadly, and the psychedelic scene, which is cool and growing. So it sounds like you've got a lot of good, you know, how do they say? Stuff over the fire, right? A lot cooking.
Right. And so in contrast, like the Sesame Street NFT is 0.0069 ETH.
There you go.
Exactly. $25.
Yeah, super affordable. Get a piece
very affordable, you know, and you buy 3, there's added value in the burn to redeem kind of phase and stuff like that. And you know, some of these OpenSea pieces are like 0.25, and you know, I've done animation stuff that's, you know, very affordable as well. So it's like I try to bring it out in different ways, but you know, these are way too much time to
no, for sure. And then do you see a future do you see a future where these NFTs you currently have out are kind of playing a role in your future kind of on-chain catalog, as you get that book finished and as you have, you know, some of these images that you've been sitting on that are available? Any thoughts towards kind of those next steps in Web3 and how, you know, you're kind of building blocks towards that?
Just I want to explore the makerspace thing for sure, and you know, explore more digital forms of expression in general. I've got loads and loads of documentation that can like lend itself, like those animations that I did are basically from still images of the sand paintings, and then, you know, kind of digitally manipulated and then presented as an animation. So it's like kaleidoscopic animations and stuff like that.
Fascinating.
Fun, just, you know, experimental stuff, and how to bring it into the digital world, as well as, you know, keep it rooted in the physical, you know, ways of doing it, you know, but like moving around artwork and presenting it is costly too. So it's like,
1,000%, you know, and that's
visual
part
makes
of
it a lot easier.
yeah, that's part of what the digital provides. It gives you that option. It doesn't mean you don't ever do the, you know, art shows and the IRL stuff, but it gives you this new kind of added opportunity to get some revenue in potentially and really just get your work in front of additional eyeballs. So amazing, man. Just really fascinated with what you got on chain and what you're working on and what you're building, and just wishing you all the best. I don't see any other questions from the chat. Do you have any final words before we wrap up here? Final thoughts?
No, just you know, my DMs are open. I have a link tree in the bio to explore my world of, you know, history, and you can check out, like, there's Wikipedia page, there's articles, there's other interviews that I've done, and I'll be sharing this one up there too. So you know, that's the sort of central link area that you can go, like, explore my world.
There we go. Linktree/Joe Mangrum. And those of you who know Linktree know how to type out that URL. So linktr.ee/Joe Mangrum. Check it out. He's got a lot of
and that's in all my social bios. So
there you go.
Just go to Instagram.
You do have to add your manifold on there. I'll just highlight that for you. You got to get that manifold drop on the Linktree. But that's amazing, man. I really appreciate this opportunity. I think you dropped a lot of gems, and it's been really an honor to be able to talk to you and to learn a little bit from your career.
Well, you're a great interviewer, David. It's like, it is a pleasure.
Awesome.
You know, we've covered so much that we did, you know.
100%.
So.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. And, you know, it would be welcome back anytime. You got future drops and you want to talk Web3, and I'm sure we'll be connecting IRL as well at some point in the near future, hopefully. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Joe. And to everybody watching, we'll be back in 2 weeks. We've gone down to bi-weekly for the summertime, so I can take advantage of this short Canadian summer that I have up here and spend some time with family. But we'll be back in 2 weeks talking to Kane Mayfield about his amazing music NFTs. Yeah, Joe and I are friends with Kane, so looking forward to that. And until next time, we'll catch you all in the metaverse. Peace out, everybody.
Ask about Wag Me Kane.
Wag Me Kane. All right, let's go. Peace out.